Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule. It's a foundational molecule for human optimization and longevity. Nitric oxide is a gas that dilates blood vessels, improves blood flow, circulation, oxygen delivery, it mobilizes stem cells, activates our mitochondria, and prevents our telomeres from getting shorter. So everything we know about human optimization and longevity is dependent upon adequate nitric oxide production.
Welcome back to Unstoppable After 50. My guest today is a world-renowned expert on nitric oxide. Dr. Nathan Bryan has decades of experience on this very important molecule that is important for all guys over 50. And he's a researcher, he is a scientist, and I wanted to bring him on because this is a topic a lot of us have not heard of or maybe just barely heard of, and it's critically important to be our best after 50. So stay tuned for an amazing conversation with Dr. Nathan Bryan. Dr. Nathan Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be with you.
Nathan, I was looking forward to this interview. I know we had it scheduled for a long time, and your book that you published in 2025, which I read cover to cover, The Secret of Nitric Oxide. Congratulations on that. And this is a topic that's interesting to me because this is something that I think a lot of guys don't necessarily know about. They may have heard about it. If they're on Amazon, it may have popped up, something like that. So this is something I think is important, and I was really looking forward to this. So let's jump into this. Nathan, for the man who has maybe never heard of nitric oxide or just sort of in passing, what is it and why should guys over 50 care?
Well, it's a signaling molecule. It's how cells in the body communicate with one another, and it's involved in basically every biological function. It's still relatively new in scientific literature and medical discoveries. It was discovered in the late 70s, early 80s. A Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998 for its discovery as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. But today, we know that the loss of nitric oxide production, the functional loss of nitric oxide production, is the earliest event in the onset and progression of all age-related chronic disease, including things like erectile dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, the #1 killer of men and women worldwide, dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, insulin resistance. I mean, you name it, it can all be traced back to an inadequate production of nitric oxide. So all men should be concerned with this because, if you're going to be unstoppable after 50, that is dependent upon your body's ability to produce nitric oxide.
And your entire career, which you discuss, in your book, has been focused on this. I mean, you have a deep, deep passion, a deep, deep experience and wisdom about nitric oxide, and it's impressive, all the papers, everything that you've done over these decades of experience and study of this. Why is this molecule something that so many guys probably haven't heard of? What, in your experience, why has it been something that's been kind of just unheard of, if you will, until recently?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons that can explain that. Number one, if you go to your physician, it's not something that they talk about. It's if they do a blood draw, and it's not part of the standard labs. And so, unfortunately, allopathic physicians think if you can't measure it, it's not important. And nitric oxide is not part of our clinical panel because, again, once it's produced, it's a gas. It's gone in less than a second. So it's not something we can pick up in peripheral blood. So that's number one. Number two, drug companies have been very unsuccessful at developing nitric oxide-based therapeutics. Even though they've been trying since the early 90s, there's been no FDA-approved nitric oxide drug except for inhalated nitric oxide for premature babies with pulmonary hypertension. It's a very select patient indication. And then, so I think that's the reason. And because nitric oxide, it was once thought, is nitric oxide even druggable? Because there's never an overproduction of nitric oxide, and most drugs are inhibitors of biochemical reactions. So when we understood that it's always the deficiency of nitric oxide that leads to chronic disease, then you can't develop inhibitors to inhibit its production. So we have to give it And then the challenge has been, how do we give a bioactive gas that's gone in less than a second? And that was really the work I've done over the past 25 years. And I've made a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. But there's also a lot of confusion because, ever since the Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998, the market was flooded with L-arginine and nitric oxide supplements. And now over the past 10 or 12 years, it's been beetroot. And it's just, it's misinformation. And it's a lack of understanding of the basic biochemistry and enzymology and physiology of nitric oxide that allow these companies to go out there and make these absurd, unscientific claims that their products can produce nitric oxide. And so I think when people try these products and don't get a benefit and don't see an improvement in their erectile dysfunction or their blood pressure normalization, then they just dismiss nitric oxide as this unimportant molecule. And that's the dangers of what these companies are doing because it could kill the entire industry.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to go onto Amazon, right, and type it in, and you'll see that plethora of marketable products that have a lot of big promises. And I have to be honest, my interest in this, my father, who's in his mid 80s, actually turned me on to this a few years ago. And
Wow.
he takes supplements, and he's in great health for the most part. But and and we have high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease in that side of the family. So I was interested, and I was looking at it because of the benefits for, blood pressure, cardiovascular. Then there's others that I learned about in your book, obviously. Can you go a little bit deeper? Because these are topics that are near and dear to every guy.
Sure.
Can you go a little deeper, doctor, on why and how nitric oxide affects the blood system and I guess the capillaries and all that?
Sure. Well, nitric oxide, when it was first discovered, was known to be a vasodilator, meaning that it dilates the blood vessels. And so we need that to regulate blood flow. It's always the regulation of blood flow that's most important. Because if we're going to recall memory, we've got to increase blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. If we're going to start to exercise, we've got to dilate the coronary arteries and increase blood flow to the heart. If we're going to be intimate, we have to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs in both men and women to get engorgement, to get erections. And so all of that is predicated on the ability to produce nitric oxide. So if you can't make nitric oxide, you can't dilate blood vessels on demand. And then what happens is you start to get chronically constricted blood vessels because you've lost the main vasodilator. And if we remember back to physics, if we've got the same volume of blood going through smaller pipes, blood pressure goes up. And high blood pressure is the number one driver of cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer. So nitric oxide, most of the time, hypertension is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And that's the reason that prescription medications only work in about 50% of the men, or 50% of the people that are treated for high blood pressure don't respond with better blood pressure. Because the class of drugs that are used aren't addressing the root cause of their hypertension. It's not a renin-angiotensin problem. It's not calcium dysregulation. So ACE inhibitors, ARBs, calcium channel blockers aren't going to lower your blood pressure. And that's what we see clinically. So we have to start focusing on nitric oxide. So that's the driver of hypertension. And then when your body can't make sufficient nitric oxide, the monocytes and neutrophils, the immune cells, start sticking to the lining of the blood vessel. And then they migrate through, it elicits an immune response. You get smooth muscle hyperplasia, you get foam cells, you get plaque deposition. And then eventually that plaque becomes unstable, it ruptures, and there's your heart attack and stroke. But this entire process, which takes, decades to occur, all can be traced back to a functional loss of nitric oxide production. And then when we look at, the insulin resistance and diabetes and metabolic disease, nitric oxide is required for insulin to do its job. So insulin resistance is now considered a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So all this science and these mechanisms are very well elucidated. Now we just have to do a better job of applying that and translating that science into clinical medicine. And that's what I've been trying to do for the past 15 years.
So Nathan, I want to take a step down, if you will, and just make sure guys are getting this, because you're saying we all create nitric oxide. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's
Okay.
a naturally produced molecule.
Okay, so it's something that our body's producing. And I know you go into this in depth in your book. At what point is there a sort of like, like with muscle, we know that after age 30, men start losing muscle, women too, but sarcopenia and all that. Is there a point in a men's life that nitric oxide, or is it individual, starts, declining?
Look, it's all individualized. It depends upon our diet, our lifestyles, to some extent our genetics. But everybody's different. If we and this is published in the literature, if you just look at different decades of age, starting at 20 to 30, 30 to 40, all the way up to 80, 90-year olds, what we see on average, and again, this isn't selecting for anything other than your age, we see on average about a 10 to 12% reduction per decade. So then by the time we're, in that 40 to 50-year-old range, we've lost 50% on average of the nitric oxide we had when we were younger. But now that we've developed some functional measurements of what's called flow media dilatation and devices that measure endothelial nitric oxide production, we're seeing 24, 25-year-old kids with the vascular age of a normal 60 or 70-year-old. And then, you've got people like me who pay attention to this. I'm 52, but I've got the vascular age of a 29-year-old. So we now know how to shift this curve to the left and to the right. And most importantly, we know how to prevent this age-related decline in nitric oxide production. And that's, I think, the most important message that we can convey, is because just because the average person out there loses nitric oxide as they get older, that doesn't have to be the case, because we know how the human body produces it. We know what leads to a loss of its natural production, and we know how to correct it.
So I believe you mentioned there's a test. Like, is this something I get extensive blood testing twice a year? It's just part of my, I just want to do it type of thing. I'm very proactive about it. Is this a blood test? Like, how do I know if I am nitric oxide deficient? Now, I know there's symptoms. I want to talk about that,
Yeah.
and signs, but is there a, metric that I can actually look at, a number?
There's a couple of FDA cleared medical devices, and what it's looking at is called flow mediated dilatation, or reactive hyperemia. And these devices are looking at how well your blood vessels produce nitric oxide and actually dilate the blood vessels. There's a couple of these on the market, and they're reimbursable. So some physicians use it. They're really forward-looking and progressive ones too. But they're occluding blood flow into your brachial artery for 5 minutes. So they'll put a blood pressure cuff on your upper arm, and they'll pump it up to suprasystolic levels to where there's no inflow, and your hand will become a little bit tingy. It's not painful, maybe a little uncomfortable. But then after that 5 minutes, they release the cuff, and then with an ultrasound probe, you can actually look at the degree of vasodilation, because those blood vessels have been starved of oxygen in blood for 5 minutes. And so the body, when you get that increased in shear stress, it turns on nitric oxide production. It dilates the blood vessels. So the degree of vasodilation you can develop an algorithm that'll tell you what your endothelial function is, or if you have endothelial dysfunction, if you don't get resultant vasodilation. So there's a number of those devices on the market, but as we mentioned, there's no blood labs. Um, but if you're nitric oxide deficient, you're going to have elevation in things like ferritin and acute phase inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, homocysteine. Elevation in homocysteine will shut down nitric oxide production. So there's what we call associations, but really nitric in blood labs and panels, but no really real measure of nitric oxide in peripheral blood.
So what are some of the practical signs, Nathan, that your nitric oxide levels are, maybe not where they should be?
Yeah. Mike, our body talks to us all the time, and we have to listen. Our body's giving us feedback. And if we don't listen, we eventually wake up one day, we get sick, or worse, we're dead. So there are signs and symptoms. There's a hierarchy of symptoms that develop. And the first one is usually sexual dysfunction. And this isn't just a man disease, this is a woman issue. And we call it the canary in the coal mine for a reason, because it's really the first sign and symptom that your blood vessels aren't producing nitric oxide. Because again, it goes back to being able to dilate the blood vessels to get engorgement, which is necessary for an erection in both men and women. But if you can't produce nitric oxide, you're not going to dilate the blood vessels, and you develop erectile dysfunction. And in fact, the drugs like Viagra, which have been on the market since 1998, the phosphodiesterase inhibitors, are dependent upon the natural production of nitric oxide. And in fact, 50% of the men over the past 27, 28 years now that have been prescribed Viagra or these other PD5 inhibitors don't respond with better erections. So why do only 50% of the men respond? It's because the 50% that don't respond aren't making any nitric oxide to activate this second messenger system where these drugs work. So again, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, this told us that erectile dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And you can potentiate the effects of PD5 inhibitors by taking nitric oxide or improving nitric oxide. Now you can take these non-responders and make them responsive. So that's number one, erectile dysfunction. Number two, your blood pressure starts to go up. Anything above 120/80 is telling us that your body's not making sufficient nitric oxide. And every 1 millimeter increase in blood pressure over 120 is a 1% increase in the development of cardiovascular disease or having a heart attack or stroke. So if you get a blood pressure of 130/85, you're about a 10% increased risk of heart attack and stroke. If you got a blood pressure of 165, 175, you're 50% greater chance of having a heart attack or stroke. So that's number two. And 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation of blood pressure. Number three, you start to develop insulin resistance. And there's certain markers in blood labs, whether it's fasting glucose, fasting insulin levels, other markers. But we now know that 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unfit. We have a pandemic of obesity and insulin resistance and diabetes. And then number four, you start to develop exercise intolerance. And if you're going to go out for a walk or a brief run, you can't dilate the blood vessels to the skeletal muscles, to the heart, or to the lungs. You're going to get short of breath, chest pain, fatigue, and that tells us you're not nitric oxide deficient. And then fifthly, we start to see, loss of cognition, mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and then eventually Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's is a metabolic vascular disease, and it's a disease of nitric oxide deficiency.
And Nathan, I want to have you go a bit deeper here because, there are so many things. If somebody is in tune with trying to achieve better health, guys, specifically, there's so much out there, right? There's so many messages and things bombarding us. Take this, do this, you must do that. You have dedicated your life to this work. Your extensive research, everything that you've done, the solutions you've created, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. I just want to make sure the audience understands this is not something, this is real. I mean, this is a very real thing. It's not some marketing hype. Nitric oxide is important. And everything you just shared is something we must all understand.
Yeah, look, no doubt. I mean, it's a foundational molecule, and don't get me wrong, this isn't a silver bullet. It's not a magic pill. It's not an end-all be-all cure-all. But what it is, it's a foundational molecule that your body cannot and will not heal or perform optimally without adequate production. Years ago, people called it a miracle molecule, but it's not a miracle because miracle implies we see an observation and we can't explain it through scientific reason. Everything we know about nitric oxide, everything it does, can be explained scientifically and biochemically. So sometimes it may seem like it has miraculous effects, but it's not a miracle molecule because we can explain everything about it. The science is there were 200,000 papers published in the scientific literature on nitric oxide. So this is it's probably one of the most studied molecules in the published literature. I mean, I don't know what other subject matter has over 200,000 scientific publications on it. But yeah, then if you turn on your TV or radio and you hear these advertisements on nitric oxide, that's a bunch of baloney because beets are not nitric oxide. These companies out there marketing this is nitric oxide are marketing executives. They're there to make money and to get you to buy their product, but they're not scientists. They've never published a single paper. They've never spent a minute or a second in a research lab. And I think that's what makes us a little bit different. That's what I've done for 30 years.
So are there things, Nathan, that guys can do to protect their nitric oxide levels?
Absolutely. That's really what the message should be because we understand how the human body makes it. We know what disrupts the natural production. And so we focus on the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels, and then we focus on the bacteria in the diet, the bacteria in the mouth and the food we eat, and sufficient stomach acid production. So number one, we'll focus on the enzyme. We have to avoid things that cause an increase in blood sugar because sugar is sticky. Glucose is glue, as the name implies. And if you've ever spilt a soda water or sweet tea on the countertop, you come back the next day, it's sticky. Well, when blood sugar is elevated in our body, it sticks to things. It sticks to proteins. It sticks to hemoglobin, We call that hemoglobin A1C. And when glue sticks to things, it locks it in a conformational state to where it can't do its job, specifically enzymes or proteins. So that's number one. You got to avoid sugar, anything that leads to an increase in blood sugar. Uh, Number two, we have to exercise. Exercise is medicine because it activates and stimulates nitric oxide production. Number three, we need at least 20, 30 minutes of direct sunlight a day. I like the first sunlight in the morning when it comes up. It completely resets your circadian rhythm. There are benefits beyond nitric oxide for sunlight. And then when we focus on this other pathway that we get from our diet, we've got to avoid anything that's antiseptic, like fluoride in our drinking water, like fluoride in our toothpaste, antiseptic mouthwash. And then the other big contributor to nitric oxide deficiency are antacids, specifically the proton pump inhibitors, the Prilosec, Prevacid, Nexium, omeprazole, pantoprazole, the prescription medications. Those drugs completely shut down nitric oxide production, and there's data now showing that people who have been on these drugs for at least 3 years have about a 40% higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. These are deadly drugs. So what I did, a long question, a long answer to your question, but you just have to stop doing the things that inhibit the natural production and start doing the things that activate and stimulate it. Get rid of fluoride, stop using mouthwash, wean off antacids, do an 18-hour fast every day, avoid simple carbohydrates and things that cause an increase in blood sugar, exercise 20, 30 minutes a day, practice nasal breathing, deep breathing, and get out in the sun every now and then.
Okay, so let's say there's guys, guys are doing that. Guys are listening, they're healthy, they're working out, everything that you just suggested. But they are having symptoms, blood pressure's up, ED, whatever it might be. What is your answer for those guys? What is your recommendation regarding supplementation or whatever it is? What are you telling those guys?
Well, they could have a single nucleotide polymorphism in their eNOS gene, a SNP. They could have a SNP in their MTHFR gene that renders them nitric oxide deficient. So they could be doing a lot of the things, but just their enzyme, their enzyme isn't optimized. And so that, genetics, you could blame genetics on it. So in that case, and that was the reason I started developing product technology, both drug therapy and consumer products, because if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we got to do it for you. And again, the challenge is how do we deliver therapeutic amounts of nitric oxide in an outpatient setting? Because the only way to effectively deliver nitric oxide is in an inpatient where you deliver it through a nasal cannula in the gas form. So I thought, well, we need nitric oxide on demand, outpatient setting. And so I developed an orally disintegrating tablet that you put this lozenge in your mouth. In over 5 to 6 minutes, it releases nitric oxide gas. It's absorbed buccally, it dilates the blood vessels. It can normalize blood pressure. We've got a number of published clinical trials on this technology. But for those patients who try everything, they try to do the right thing, but maybe they're compromised because of some SNPs, then they need a little bit of extra nitric oxide. And they can get that through our lozenge. We also make a fermented beet powder. That's the only beet powder on the market that actually produces nitric oxide because we understand the science. And we can take that, put it in water, and take it as a shot, and it's going to produce nitric oxide internally. But that's been our philosophy from day one is if your body can't make it, we got to do it for you. But we understand the mechanisms in play that we can improve the body's ability to make it on its own.
Yeah, and you describe this in detail in your book. I found it a fascinating journey because it's rooted in so much research and years of development. It was quite impressive as I was reading through there, Nathan.
Well,
So,
it's been, research is not for the faint of heart because it's very competitive. Sometimes it gets monotonous, but the important, there's no feeling like the feeling of discovery. And that's what I loved about it because you can ask any biological question and design a set of experiments to get an answer. And a lot of times it's not the answer you're looking for, but that's where discoveries and innovations come in. It's to see what everyone else has seen, but to think what no one else has thought. And that's been my guiding principle for the past 20 years.
let's just make sure everyone understands you can go online, you can go to Amazon. Your professional recommendation, all the years of experience you've done this, you're saying those products for the most part are a waste?
Now, there's two types of products, and you hit on them. There's the products that contain arginine and citrulline. And look, these are supplements. Supplements are designed to supplement what the human body is missing. And arginine and citrulline are semi-essential amino acids, meaning that we're never deficient in these. It's made through the partial urea cycle that's present in every cell in the human body. and we get it from the breakdown of protein, whether we're eating animal protein or plant protein. So if we're never deficient in these, it makes no sense to supplement. And nitric oxide deficiency is never caused from an L-arginine deficiency. So it makes no sense to supplement. So that's an easy litmus test for me. If you go and you're on Amazon or whatever, and a company has arginine or citrulline in their products, it's an easy. These companies don't know what they're doing. They're putting it in there because it's a buzzword, and so that's easy. Just avoid those. Avoid those products. They provide zero benefit. And then you've got the beet products. The beets were popular back in 2012 Olympic Games. And then all these beet powders hit the market, and beet juices and beetroot powders. And I've tested these, and we've actually used a lot of these as placebos in our clinical trials. Because again, if you don't understand what it takes that's required in the beets to make nitric oxide, and then the other problem is, it requires a certain oral bacterium community to metabolize the nitrate that may be found in beets into nitrite and nitric oxide. And with 73% of the municipalities in the US having fluoride in their drinking water, sterilizing their mouth, 9 out of 10 Americans use a fluoride-based toothpaste. 2 out of 3 Americans use an antiseptic mouthwash, completely sterilizing their mouth. They take the beetroot product, even if there's nitrate in there, they pee it out, they poop it out, and they sweat it out. And then their pee turns pink and red, their poop turns pee and pink and red, and it causes a lot of anxiety. But there's zero nitric oxide benefit from there. Because the other thing the consumers don't understand, even the manufacturers don't understand, these are water-soluble nutrients. So when you take the beet from the ground, you make a high Brix concentrate, you got to put it in high heat, high pressure to make a powder out of it. Well, all the water-soluble nutrients come out. All you're left with is a dead beet pulp, and it's a dead beet product. So, I turn on the TV and I see all these companies advertising beets do this, beets nitric oxide, and it's like, are you kidding me? There's nothing, and I've tested these. There is zero nitric oxide benefits from beets. So, folks, the number one thing to hear, beets are not nitric oxide. Don't believe the marketing, the deceptive, fraudulent advertising you see on TV. It doesn't work.
So you're telling me all those times I was choking down nasty beet powder mixed in water, I was wasting my time because I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, beets, they're natural, organic beet powder I was buying. And I thought that was the right thing to do. And again, as soon as I read your book, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So
Now, look, there's companies out there that prey on people, and they're very good at advertising and marketing, but they're very poor at science.
yeah, that's an unfortunate reality. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So
And it's not just this field. It's
oh, for sure.
Look, there are a lot of good companies out there who make good products. I don't want to criticize it, but this isn't vitamin C we can put in a capsule. This is nitric oxide. This is a gas. And I'll tell people if these companies don't know what they're doing, they should get out of the nitric oxide business. Go sell something else. Go sell some other nutrient that's water stable, that's repleting, replenishing a missing nutrient. But leave nitric oxide to the people who understand the science.
So Nathan, before we wrap up, I want you to go deeper on your products because I'm interested. I'm interested in hearing so guys can get an understanding and make their own decision. What do we have? So tell me about your products. How do you take it? How often? Is it for the rest of your life? Give us a picture of what that would look like supplementing with your products.
Well, first, let me start by saying it was never my intention to develop dietary supplements. I come from the world of academia where we're charged with understanding the mechanisms of these to the extent we can make safe and effective drug therapy. And we're developing nitric oxide drug therapy. But once we realized nitric oxide is a naturally produced molecule and understood how the human body makes it, we could actually produce natural products in a supplement dose that could restore the natural production of nitric oxide. So then we entered the market to do this years ago. But again, nitric oxide is a gas. It's not a pill you swallow. It's not a gummy or a chew you put in your mouth and chew. So we had to make this gas. And so our primary line of products are called N101. It's the letter N, number one, letter O, number one, and that's N101.com. But we make an orally disintegrating tablet. You put it in your mouth. And I designed this because I wanted to release a certain amount of nitric oxide over a certain period of time. I never want to give the body something that it hasn't seen at rates or fluxes that wouldn't be unnatural. We want to recapitulate physiology. We call it restorative physiology. So we had to make an orally disintegrating tablet that dissolves over a certain period of time that releases nitric oxide gas. So if your body can't make it, we're providing it for you. But number two, we have to understand what leads to the dysfunctional enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels. We understand that. So we put components in there that recouple the enzymes. So now we see about a 20 to 40% improvement in natural endothelial nitric oxide production within 20 minutes. And then we also focus on the oral microbiome because it's sitting in the oral cavity. It's killing the pathogenic bacteria. It's restoring the normal flora. And so we're improving nitric oxide production from both pathways. So that's the N101 lozenge. As I mentioned, we make I felt an obligation. All these companies out there selling beet products that really don't do anything. I can provide a beet product that actually produces nitric oxide. We ferment the beets, we take out the oxalates, you put it in water, we add electrolytes, peak ATP, a patented product. And so when you put it in water, you mix it and take it as a shot, it releases nitric oxide throughout the body. An incredible energy pre-workout. You get an incredible pump from that. And then I make a topical nitric oxide for skincare and beauty, a dual chamber pump. You mix one pump from each side, you mix it together, it produces nitric oxide on the surface of the skin for remarkable effects in skincare and beauty. Then we learned about the dangers of fluoride and toothpaste. So I was almost forced to develop a nitric oxide friendly toothpaste we launched about 6 or 8 months ago. It's targeting the oral microbiome. We're seeing blood pressure come down by switching to our toothpaste and people who have resistant hypertension. We're developing a nitric oxide friendly mouth rinse, because some people want to use mouthwash, but let's give them a safe alternative instead of sterilizing their mouth and killing them. Let's support the microbiome. Um, and what else? I think that's it. So that's on the horizon. But we're also developing drug therapy we've got a drug in FDA clinical trials for heart disease, got a drug for Alzheimer's, and we're taking our topical drug technology for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds. But
Yeah.
it'll transform healthcare and it's going to change the world.
Yeah. 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 Again, in your book, you cover a lot of this, and it's amazing what you're doing, and that's why I was so looking forward to having you on the show. So Nathan, just before we go, I just want to make sure I understand. Then, when your lozenge, is that something then you start taking? Do you take it for a period of time? Is it the rest of your life? Is it once a day? What does that look like?
Ideally, if we lived in a perfect world where we got all our nutrients we needed from the food we eat and we weren't exposed to environmental toxicants, then you would never need to supplement, right? But the problem is we live in a toxic world. We eat nutrient depleted foods. We're exposed to toxins. And so we need this daily nitric oxide support. And so, I've been my guinea pig for the past 30 years. I've been taking a form of my nitric oxide product for probably 25 or 30 years. And I think the data are real. I'm 52, but I'm 29 to 34 year old, depending on which age markers we're looking at. But I take my product not because I need it, it's because I don't want to need it, right? Because I want to continuously enhance my nitric oxide production, optimize it, and not lead to this age-related decline in nitric oxide production. So there's only two people in the world who need the lozenge. It's the people who are sick and want to get well. It's the people who are well and don't want to get sick. So if you fall in one of those two categories, I think you need it. Just your dosing depends upon your own metabolic needs, whether you're using it prophylactically or reactively. But I think everybody could benefit from a daily nitric oxide boost.
Very good. So where can my audience learn more about your products? I mentioned the URL. Is that is that the URL they should be going to? Where can they get your book? All that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, I'd highly encourage the read of the book. This is, we launched this on Fox and Friends last year with my agent Alan Morrell and Brick Tower Press. So it's done well, but it's education, and education is power. Knowledge is power, but only if you put it to use. You can find it at nathansbook.com, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan Nitric Oxide. We put out educational, informative content, and we put a lot of these other products to test, and I've demoed them on YouTube. And some of these companies don't like that, and they've actually sued me for showing their products don't work. But we'll continue to tell the truth despite the sometimes legal backlash. But it's important to maintain the integrity of the field. I'm hosting and organizing an international nitric oxide meeting in Austin, Texas, April 23rd through the 25th at the Fairmont Hotel. It's no2026.com. If you want to learn more, it's a scientific conference. We'll have the world's experts there. The guy who won the Nobel Prize, Lou Ignara, will be there with me. It's been an exciting event. You can follow me on Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm Dr. Nitric. And then, for the products, it's n101.com. Letter N, number one, letter O, number one.com.
Very good. Well, Nathan, again, I appreciate, everything that you've shared. It's one of those things I think every guy needs to know about. And, check out your website, get the book. I'll definitely check out your YouTube channel. I haven't seen that yet. But, again, thank you. And before we go, Nathan, I have something I call my Unstoppable After 50 trifecta. It's 3 quick questions, 3 quick answers that I get from all my guests. What is one habit or decision you made after 50? I know you're just kind of right there, but after 50, it's really made the biggest difference in your life.
For me, it's an 18-hour daily fast. I think that had the biggest impact on how I feel, my body composition, and just, my metabolic flexibility.
Awesome. What's beside your book?
Yeah.
What's one book you recommend every guy should read?
There's a book called Healing is Voltage by Jerry Tennant. He's a physician friend of mine in Dallas, but it really talks about, the body electric and how you need voltage and conductance for the body to heal. And, if you run out of voltage, and electricity, we die. But, we're like a battery. We're not like a light switch. The red light comes on our smartphone and we immediately go and plug it in. But, there are red lights that come on us all the time and we ignore it. And, it leads to chronic disease. So Healing is Voltage by Jerry Tennant's an incredible read.
Very good. And finally, what's your Unstoppable After 50 challenge for my audience this week?
The challenge would be, start making small steps. You can't do this all at once. But, for me, the biggest change, as I said, was an 18-hour fast every day. Do a 24-hour fast once a week, and then once a quarter, I'll do a 48 or 72-hour fast. But you're going to see remarkable changes with it. And then the other thing is, get good sleep. My body needs 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and I'm very diligent about doing that because there is no substitute for sleep.
Well, Nathan, thank you very much. Appreciate this conversation. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you. Keep up the good work.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Nathan Bryan. I hope you can see why I was so looking forward to having him on the show. I would highly recommend you check out his book. It's an in-depth read. I'll warn you on that. It's an in-depth read, but it's definitely an eye-opening book, and I think it's important for all guys to read and understand why nitric oxide is so important. And if you like what I'm doing here with Unstoppable After 50, please make sure you like and subscribe to the show. Go check out the YouTube channel. Appreciate you subscribing there. And also make sure you check out unstoppableafter50.com and sign up for my weekly playbook. Every week I send a recap to my group of men who've asked for it, PDF that's designed to be printed and saved, and it's a recap of that previous week's episode. So check out unstoppableafter50.com.